Not long after the Halloween horrors have ended, a cyclist's gruesome murder leaves her community in shock.
Her head was missing and had been cut off.
This was brutal beyond brutality.
To know that a woman was murdered like that was terrifying for everybody.
Before investigators can identify a suspect, another victim is found.
You have two bicyclists who are killed about 10 months apart in a brutal fashion.
Despite grisly public displays, the killer evades capture for years.
They're looking at pages and pages of potential suspects.
The general theory was our perpetrator was either dead or he'd moved on.
But was the killer merely hiding in plain sight?
He had created this persona, this character that he played in public, called the zombie hunter.
He's right there. He's taunting us. This was truly over-the-top evil.
See how that's possible. I didn't kill anyone.
This is our version of Jack the Ripper.
November 8th, 1992, the week after Halloween in Phoenix, Arizona. For one resident, the season of horror continues.
The Phoenix Police Department received a call from Joe Krakowicki, and Joe indicated that Angela Brasso had gone out for a bike ride that night and she hadn't returned. And this was unlike her.
According to Joe, he and his girlfriend frequently ride the nearby Arizona Canal bike trail, but when she didn't return after more than an hour, he became worried. Fearing she might be injured and stranded on the trail, dispatchers send out officers. They find some alarming evidence near the canal.
You had a certain amount of blood on that bike trail, and then there was a trail that went kind of in a north direction towards a tree, and the blood trail continues on up about 100 feet or so. Some officers walked up a berm area, which was very close to where Angela's apartment and where Joe had made the phone call.
At the end of the trail, they find something even more disturbing.
They discover a headless body. Her head was missing and had been cut off.
We had never had a crime like this. This was brutal beyond brutality.
The responding officer immediately calls for backup.
She's in the nude. The only thing she's wearing is her shoes and socks were left on. There was a deep incision that almost looked like a cross that went from her sternum area all the way down. It looked like the perpetrator tried to actually cut her in half, but was unsuccessful.
The stabbing was brutal in terms of the amount of force rendered onto her body with this blade.
There were also two wounds that were some type of instrument were driven into the area where typically the female reproductive organs are.
It was a vicious murder, like nothing we had ever seen before.
Although fingerprint confirmation could take several days, investigators suspect they've found their missing person.
Everything indicated that that was Miss Brasso. We look at who was around, who was related. Since this was a very savage close-up murder, typically sometimes that's done by a perpetrator that knows the victim.
But late at night, on a canal bank with no one around, a lone female is vulnerable. And that could very well have been a crime of opportunity opposed to somebody targeted.
Nobody seemed to know what happened to her. The race was on to try to figure out who did this.
Born and raised in Pennsylvania, Angela Brasso recently moved to Phoenix with her boyfriend, Joe Krakowicki, after graduating from college.
Angela Brasso was beloved. She was a great student. She was extremely friendly. People described her as lively.
They stayed together even though they were separated by entire state during their college years. She had graduated. She moved here with her boyfriend, and they lived together, and they were really excited about their life together.
Angela is a very hardworking, very family-oriented woman. She has this new job. She had flown out to Los Angeles that prior week and put on an extensive IT, information technology training.
After spending so much time apart, Joe and Angela were putting down roots and making the most of their life together, enjoying Phoenix's outdoor lifestyle. The night Angela disappeared, she and Joe were getting ready to celebrate her 22nd birthday.
The sun was starting to set, and this was in November, so it was crisp and cool out. One of the most ideal times to be outside doing activities in Phoenix. She told him, I'll be right back, you know, typical bike ride, and then I'll be home. Angela Brasso never made it home that night.
Just a few hours later, the media has been alerted to a large police presence at the Arizona Canal, where officers have found Angela's decapitated body.
The word got out quickly, and there was a lot of media attention on this particular case.
All of this was extremely grisly. The Arizona Canal was a really popular place to bike, to run, to rollerblade, walk your dog. There was just this sense of fear, as if everybody in Phoenix was petrified for what's going to happen next.
Officers searched the area for any sign of the killer, but whoever it was seems to have fled the scene without detection.
We have so many cameras nowadays, but back then on the canal, there were no cameras. They didn't have witnesses either.
Homicide detectives are called to the scene, and they begin piecing together the evidence to explain what happened.
The stab wound to the back, it penetrated a lung and aorta, and then it caused extensive bleeding. They didn't find defensive wounds, which would indicate that it was swift, a blitz-style attack. She was startled on her bike or got off her bike, and the perpetrator immediately rushed in and drove that knife into her back. It definitely would have rendered her unable to fight. There was definitely injuries that were consistent with being dragged for a considerable distance. It appeared that the victim had been sexually assaulted. There was a lot of clothing strewn about the body that had been cut and torn. That was packaged and sent to the Department of Public Safety crime lab for processing, looking for semen, perpetrator's blood, any kind of hairs, that kind of thing.
Given the level of violence, investigators suspect the perpetrator may have a record.
Investigators looked to see if there were any other cases that were at all related, and they weren't able to find anything that matched that level of beheading in the city of Phoenix and or the state of Arizona. It was the most horrendous, horrific murder that Phoenix had seen.
Coming up, detectives take a closer look at Angela's boyfriend.
That's when the alarm bells went off with him of, hey, something's wrong.
And a major break in the case rises up from the murky waters.
Police get a call of a head that was found in the canal.
After discovering the decapitated body of Angela Brasso at a violent scene, investigators immediately turned to her friends and loved ones for potential leads.
Investigators learned that Angela was very easy to get along with. There were really no issues with any particular person being an enemy or wanting to cause her harm.
According to her inner circle, the only recent source of conflict in Angela's life was the relationship with her boyfriend, Joe Krakowicki.
There was some suspicion surrounding Joe, and a lot of times they look at a partner first.
There was indication that Angela was not particularly happy with Joe at the time. There were problems, and the relationship was not going forward, and that maybe she was going to look for another apartment and move out.
When detectives reach out to Joe, he immediately agrees to give a statement.
Joe was as shaken as any person that cared about another person would be. Joe was extremely cooperative, sincere. There was a little bit, maybe, that the relationship was a little bit better than on his side than what Angela had told her friends. But other than that, yeah, Joe was very cooperative. Joe told investigators that he stayed home that night. He'd sometimes gone riding with Angela, but he decided not to because he wanted to make a cake for her birthday. And while she was bike riding, he was making the cake.
When Angela didn't return after an hour, Joe began to worry.
They always watched a show back in the 90s called In Living Color. And every single Sunday night at 8 p.m., they watched that show together. So that's when the alarm bells went off with him. Hey, something's wrong. She's always back by this time. At about 9 o'clock that night, he called the police department to file a missing person to check for Angela. And then a friend of his came over.
When detectives find out who Joe called, alarm bells ring.
Joe had invited a female friend over to assist him in looking for Angela. Strange that, of all people, you would invite another female that really wasn't known to other family and friends. So while Joe was maintained as a strong person of interest, investigators extensively canvassed the canal, stopped people, tried to get as much information, went to the apartment complex, went to neighbors. Did you see anything? Did you hear anything? And that was largely negative.
Searching for any leads, investigators turned back to the crime lab.
So investigators were able to extract a DNA profile from the clothing that was found at the scene, as well as a sexual assault kit.
In 1992, when this crime occurred, CODIS was in its infancy. CODIS is the computerized DNA index system. It's basically a database for DNA.
They knew they had somebody's DNA who was not Angela on Angela's clothes, but they couldn't make a match to whose that was.
But they are able to eliminate a person of interest.
Joe's DNA sample was ruled out compared to the perpetrator's sample, and he was ruled out.
Lacking leads from the physical evidence, police hope something missing from the crime scene might bring in a tip.
The bike that Angela was riding when she went missing was a higher-end mountain bike, and it was specific.
This was a very unique bike. It was a diamondback, purple But it wasn't just purple, it had shades of purple. It's really kind of fluorescent looking and brilliant in color. And it stood out.
Investigators provide a description to patrol officers in the area. If the bike is still out there, it should be easy to spot.
I would be driving around my beat specifically looking at every apartment complex, every school, every shopping center. No matter how small or how big, I would be hitting those bike racks, hoping I get to find this bike and be part of solving this crime. I remember thinking, if you can do this type of crime to the savage nature that he did it, and it's sexually motivated, you're gonna be a weird puppy. You're gonna have a twisted thoughts, and this individual isn't going to go unnoticed. I'd ask, is there some weird guy in the neighborhood that, you know, freaks you out? Sometimes they would give me a name. I would take that name, I would forward it to a homicide unit.
Phoenix police also open a tip line for the public to assist the investigation.
So about 10 days after Angela's murder, police get a call of a head that was found in the canal. This was about 2 miles south of where Angela had been murdered. It was in a highly populated area next to a mall called Metro Center Mall. Investigators then are dispatched, and it was in fact determined to be Angela's head.
At first glance, it seems the killer discarded her head downriver to make identification more difficult. But closer inspection reveals something peculiar.
Angela's head, it didn't match up. The level of decomposition of the head was not consistent with how long the head could have potentially been in the water.
Because of that, detectives thought possibly whoever did this actually had stored her head in a freezer to preserve it. It was bizarre.
Investigators believe that the perpetrator may have put the head in the canal for a shock value, more shock and awe to the citizens of Phoenix of, you know, look what I've done.
That added a whole new level of fear to the entire community.
It is not at all uncommon in the context of serial offenders to take something with them, some sort of trophy, so that they can go and relive that perverse gratification that he was experiencing.
When the head is found and then that hits the news, that's when you saw the canal bank become a ghost town. People were talking about this crime as if it was already a serial killer. The entire unit was working this case. You've got to find this guy before he does this again.
Unfortunately, investigators are unable to come up with any further leads.
As a patrol officer, every call I go on, I'm looking at my clipboard. Every prowler call, I'm looking to see if the person might have been on a bicycle. So for 10 months, I'm doing that, and I'm not finding any really strong suspect. Nothing that stood out like, oh my God, this is the guy. None. And then sadly, 10 months later, he hit again.
A body was found floating in the canal.
In September 1993, 10 months after Angela Brasso was found decapitated in Phoenix, Arizona, investigators are called to the scene of another gruesome murder.
A cyclist called in another young woman who was found floating in the canal, which happened to be directly across from where Angela's head had been found. Our dive team went into the waters, recovered the female's body, brought her to the shore. It looked like a late teen victim dressed in a turquoise bodysuit meant for a 8 to 10-year-old.
Detectives note several similarities to Angela's case.
There were drag marks. There were definitely abrasions caused from dragging. They also found a stab wound to her left rear side, which is similar to Angela's wound. There was a considerable pooling of blood along the bike path where it looked like the perpetrator had attacked her there. There was also clothing found that was cut, blood-stained. There was a drag trail in blood all the way up towards the tunnel into some vegetation. That was the area where she'd been potentially sexually assaulted, redressed, and then drugged back and dumped in the canal.
This victim wasn't decapitated, but police do find another calling card left by the killer.
There was also carvings in her body that the investigators could see, including a cross. It was very eerie, and I'm sure the perpetrator was trying to send a message. Good detectives never jump to conclusions. Now, with that said, you have two females who are killed about 10 months apart in a brutal fashion. The head was found floating close to where this victim was found. So you definitely have some things circumstantially pointing you towards, hey, this is the same guy.
Cross-checking police reports, the victim matches the description of 17-year-old Melanie Burness, who was reported missing by her mother the night before.
Once we had determined for sure that it was Melanie Burness and talked to her mother, the family was destroyed by the news. Melanie was extremely bright. She was I believe, a junior in high school, had the world in front of her.
Melanie and I worked together all summer long at the ice cream shop at the Galleria Mall, and we hung out daily. Melanie was pretty reserved and quiet, but then once you got to know her, she was very spontaneous and adventurous. She'd come up with some creative ideas like, let's go to Sedona, or let's drive here. While she did know a lot of people and had multiple friends, I would say her circle of trust, her close group, was probably much smaller.
Melanie had been with her mother the night prior. They had been at their home, and Melanie's mother had gone out for a dinner. And when Melanie's mother returned, she noticed that Melanie was not at the home. She discovered that Melanie's bike was missing, and she figured that Melanie possibly took her bike out. She had really no idea where she went riding.
I knew she loved to bike, and that was a passion of hers. She would bike, miles upon miles, but Melanie would usually ride her bike with her girlfriends, or at least one or two friends. It wasn't common of her to go by herself that often.
The family was asked about the bodysuit, and they said it was way too small. There's no way she would have been wearing that underneath her clothing. The family was able to give it a pretty good description of what she typically wears when she rides, and that was the clothing that was found that was cut off and kind of strewn about the crime scene.
Detectives question why the killer put Melanie in a piece of child's clothing. The answer might prove to be the key to finding a suspect.
A DNA profile was developed from Melanie's clothing and sexual assault kit, and that went into the national database, and there were no hits on that.
Technology isn't advanced enough to definitively confirm a match to the sample from Angela's case.
So they focused on the bodysuit, and they put that out to the media, and they said, does anybody know about this bodysuit? Has anybody seen anybody with this bodysuit? Because it meant something to our perpetrator. So the bodysuit goes out, and it generates even more tips and calls coming in that have to be triaged and vetted out to see, hey, which ones are viable? Do we need to work?
Local media brands the unknown perpetrator as the Canal Killer. further intensifying the community's fear. Unfortunately, none of the incoming tips provide a viable suspect.
I think the department did its best and worked, and the investigators were top-notch, and they brought in tons of manpower to work these cases. Unfortunately, as time marches on, other things start to happen to where, sadly, even though investigators work diligently to try to solve these crimes and find the perpetrator, these cases kind of faded as you went through the 90s.
Although the cases remain unsolved, they are not forgotten. 6 years after the initial investigations, developing technology allows detectives to retest their DNA evidence.
In 1999, the DNA system was really had blossomed. The experts had really figured things out.
This time, with more detailed testing capabilities, there is a match. Not with any known criminals, but with the DNA sample collected from Angela Brasso.
We knew at that point that Melanie's killer and Angela's killer were one and the same. That was a major moment because finally, with science, we were able to link those cases.
Unfortunately, the discovery doesn't bring investigators any closer to finding their killer. Another decade goes by with no further movement in the cases.
Be the 10-year anniversary, 15-year anniversary, there would be different attempts to highlight the cases in the media, to draw attention. Really nothing substantially developed. And I think that the general theory was our perpetrator was either dead or he'd moved on.
But in 2011, interest in the murder investigations is rekindled.
In 2008, I had the opportunity to become the cold case homicide sergeant, and we were solving about 12 to 15 cold cases per year. In 2011, I get a public records request.
A local media station is doing a follow-up about the canal killer and wants to know if there are any updates. Detective Hillman takes the opportunity to reopen the cases.
There were files and files in the basement, and there were 800 to 1,000 names on this canal list. And at that point, I knew I needed to assemble a team and give those girls justice.
Coming up, the search for Angela and Melanie's killer gains traction.
So for the first time, using DNA, we could connect with long-lost relatives.
And investigators finally come face to face with a deranged predator.
There was just silence in the room. The hair on the back of my neck stood up.
19 years after the murders of Angela Brasso and Melanie Bernis sent fear rippling through their Arizona community, the haunting tale that began shortly after Halloween 1992 has become a local urban legend. In 2011, a cold case unit led by Detective Troy Hillman reopens the cases and their search for the canal killer.
They're looking at pages and pages of potential suspects or people of interest. So the first goal is let's narrow this list down.
There are certain types, patterns to blood through DNA. You could look at that sequence and then compare those. We, over the course of the next 3.5 years working this case, probably ruled out 25 or more leads.
Unfortunately, they are still unable to come up with any suspects that match the DNA profile. In 2014, a genealogist suggests a different approach.
I went to Phoenix to talk to the police department about applying genealogy to forensic cases, to cold cases. For the first time, using DNA, we could connect with long-lost relatives in the absence of documentation.
The canal killer might not be in the database, but perhaps a member of his family is.
We use the Y DNA because it goes along the male line of the family. If the DNA matched, then you'd know that that was somebody related to you along the male line of your family.
It was worth a shot. So we decided to use her. The DNA sequence was sent over to her in late December of 2014.
I typed those string of numbers into our software, ran the software, and then came up with matches.
I got the call from her, and I was excited, pulled myself away from my Christmas and went in and into the office.
The family name that matches the DNA profile is Miller, with 5 potential suspects.
The first couple really didn't catch my attention, but when I came across Bryan Patrick Miller, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. An anonymous caller called back in 1994 and said that they knew something about the bodysuit that he believed to be the same bodysuit put on Melanie in the possession of Bryan.
It seems police had been so inundated with tips during the original investigation, they'd overlooked this one. When detectives check Miller's background, they discover a criminal record that fits the profile of their killer.
In 1989, Bryan Patrick Miller was a teenager, and he was heading towards an area near Paradise Valley Mall. And according to police reports, he saw a woman who he believed looked like his mom. And Bryan and his mom had had a history of abuse.
He ran up and stabbed the woman in the back. He was later apprehended for that.
The victim escaped, and since Miller was underage, he was sent to juvenile detention. Miller was scheduled to be released on his 18th birthday, but his mother argued against it.
On the day he was supposed to get out, she drops off a letter and says, "I found this in Bryan's bedroom."
That letter was called the plan. And in this piece of paper, Bryan had outlined step by step what he wanted to do to a woman. That included vicious sexual acts against her, graphic descriptions of the kind of sexual things he wanted to do, ultimately killing her.
Well, it was horrific. So I called an emergency team meeting. I said, hey guys, everybody in the conference room, we need to talk about this Miller guy. We handed out the file, and they all got to digest the file. And it was just silence in the room of, whoa, we've been looking for this guy, and this may be him.
Police records show that after his release in 1990, Miller's violent acts weren't limited to Arizona.
Bryan had married a woman in the mid-1990s after our murders, and they had subsequently moved up to the state of Washington. They had a daughter together.
In Washington, there was a woman named Melissa Ruiz Ramirez who was stabbed by Bryan Patrick Miller.
He had picked up Melissa, brought her back to his place of work. She asked to use a phone. She picks up the phone, then he comes up behind her and stabs her multiple times. She is very scrappy. She fights back and survives. He ends up getting arrested for that.
His defense was that she was trying to rob him.
Bryan was acquitted in self-defense. So we know he did it, we know it happened, but he was acquitted in a trial. Because Bryan was not convicted of that, there was no DNA of his entered into the system.
An internet search reveals Miller got divorced in 2006 and returned to Phoenix with his now teenage daughter. And it seems he's picked up some rather unusual interests.
We began to look at social media, get a timeline. Where's he been? Where does he work? Who are his friends, family? We found he was heavily into steampunk and cosplay.
The easiest way to explain steampunk would be, it's almost like a fantasy historical reenactment of the 1800s or Victorian dress. I met Bryan about 2012. He had just come on the steampunk scene and was looking to do something fun and different.
He had created this persona, this character that he played in public called the zombie hunter. He had all of these pictures on his Facebook and a Tumblr page that showed him in this trench coat with these goggles and a helmet and this giant Gatling gun. And he had bought an old police car and tricked it out to say the zombie hunter. And he would take the car and his costume and go to parades, to festivals, to community events as this kind of fantastical character he created.
The zombie hunter vehicle by itself was quite telling, almost like he enjoyed being law enforcement.
He would take pictures with police officers, sheriff's deputies, almost like he was the good guy fighting the bad guys.
I just remember looking at that photo and I'm like, he's hiding in plain sight. He's right there. He's taunting us.
After 2 decades, investigators in Phoenix, Arizona believe they've finally identified the elusive canal killer. 42-year-old cosplayer and self-styled zombie hunter, Bryan Patrick Miller.
Our team was excited. The proof is in the pudding, so to speak. It's going to be with his DNA.
To obtain a sample of Miller's DNA, one of Hillman's detectives comes up with a clever ruse.
He worked at a distribution facility on the west side of town. The plan was for him to go introduce himself to Bryan in the distribution facility parking lot, say, hey, I work next door. There's been a lot of retail theft going on. I noticed you like law enforcement. Can I hire you to be kind of eyes and ears, security out here to watch this place? Bryan took the bait. They arranged a meeting at a restaurant on the north side of town. We had it all set up. Bryan shows up, though, with his daughter. Huge curveball, because now we had to watch whose DNA is which and who eats what and that kind of thing. I think he drank just a couple sips and leaves, and we were wondering, did we get the DNA?
The glass is sent to the lab for analysis.
About 2 weeks later, and my phone starts to ring, and it's the DNA supervisor. She said, you did it. Bryan Miller's your guy. I can remember that day. I think people, they got up, they hugged, they just pure, raw emotion in the room.
On January 13th, 2015, Miller is arrested.
So in that early 90s area, you were in the Phoenix area. You know which bike trails I'm talking about?
I didn't like taking the trails along the canal. Those always scared me. That's why I didn't take them.
You live in the Phoenix area, and do you remember hearing any news articles about any ladies being killed?
Always saw a few.
And there's some DNA evidence that kind of links you to those girls. Is there any way you can explain that to them?
I don't see how that's possible. Why didn't kill anyone?
When investigators talk to Miller's family, his daughter isn't able to tell them much. But his ex-wife drops a bombshell.
She told us some troubling stuff about their sex life. Particularly, they would bring a knife and carve on her and lick the blood.
He began to engage in violent role play that disturbed her and led to the end of their marriage.
Miller's ex-wife agrees to testify against him when his murder trial begins in 2022.
She basically told us that she was frightened of Bryan, that she was just so afraid that she just kind of walked away and checked out.
With the DNA evidence and supporting testimony, prosecutors believe they have enough evidence to convict Miller. Instead of arguing that Miller did not kill Angela Brasso and Melanie Bernis, the defense insists he was not responsible for his actions.
In psychology, they say, genetics loads the gun and environment pulls the trigger. Bryan faced a difficult childhood. He was abused by his mother.
There were awful things that were described, including her threatening to cut off his penis and hitting him with the belt buckle part of a belt and forcing him to watch violent movies. The defense attorney basically laid out this idea that there were two different Bryans, almost like he had an evil twin, and he couldn't control what the other Bryan did.
The prosecution's experts don't agree.
Eroticized violence could be linked somehow to a misunderstanding of how to express affection as somebody matures or progresses through adolescence, but that in no way explains the violent acts committed by Bryan Patrick Miller.
On April 11th, 2023, the court returns its verdict.
Bryan was found guilty of count of murder each for each of the girls, kidnapping and attempt sexual assault for both girls.
Miller's attorneys ask for life imprisonment. Instead, the judge sentences him to death.
I've seen a lot of murder in my days as a police officer, but this was truly over-the-top evil.
This is our version of Jack the Ripper. That you had victims who were horribly murdered and nobody knew who had done it. He instilled a lot of fear in a lot of people.
There is the Bryan that I know, and then there is the Bryan that did these heinous things. And you can't put them together. They're two very different personas. They're two different people. Like a light switched off in his brain somewhere, and now he's this serial killer.
Angela and Melanie both had bright futures ahead of them. Angela had a great job. Melanie was soon to graduate high school. I think we have to remember that they were important people in our community that were taken far too soon.
We want her to be remembered as just a loving friend, an adventurous, caring soul. To me, there's no excuse. I mean, to me, he's an evil man, a monster.
The peaceful desert city of Phoenix, Arizona, is renowned for its sunny skies, mountain views, and active outdoor lifestyle. In the early 1990s, one of the most popular places for residents to enjoy this climate was the Arizona Canal Bike Trail, a scenic pathway that winded through the community, offering a safe space for runners, cyclists, and families to exercise and enjoy the fresh air. This sense of security was abruptly and deeply shattered in the autumn of 1992, when a young woman went for a routine evening ride and never returned. The subsequent investigation would span decades, highlighting both the terrifying patience of a quiet predator and the incredible determination of law enforcement officers who refused to let the passage of time obscure the pursuit of justice. The first victim of this quiet terror was Angela Brasso, a 22-year-old college graduate who had recently relocated to Phoenix from Pennsylvania alongside her boyfriend, Joe. Described by friends and family as an incredibly friendly, lively, and hard-working individual, she was embarking on an exciting new chapter in her life, having recently completed training for a promising career in information technology. On the evening of November 8, 1992, the week after Halloween, she decided to take advantage of the crisp autumn weather by going for a quick bicycle ride along the nearby canal trail, promising her boyfriend she would return shortly. They had planned to watch a popular television program together at 8 o'clock. That evening, a weekly tradition they cherished. When 8 o'clock passed and she had not arrived, Joe began to worry, and by 9 o'clock, he contacted the Phoenix Police Department to report her missing, fearing she might have suffered an injury on the dark path. Responding officers began a search of the canal trail near the couple's apartment. In the darkness, they discovered a disturbing scene that began with a pool of blood on the concrete path, followed by a clear trail leading toward a nearby grassy area. At the end of this trail, officers discovered the lifeless remains of a young female. The perpetrator had committed an act of extreme violence, inflicting severe fatal trauma and taking deliberate steps to desecrate the remains. The level of violence was unprecedented for the local department, indicating a highly disturbed individual who acted with immense force and malice. The victim's bicycle, a highly distinctive mountain bike with a vibrant fluorescent purple finish, was nowhere to be found, suggesting the attacker had taken it from the scene. The community was instantly gripped by fear as news of the discovery spread. The canal path, once a bustling hub of daily activity, quickly became deserted as residents realized a dangerous individual was walking among them. Investigators immediately began looking for potential suspects, starting as they standardly do with those closest to the victim. Joe, her boyfriend, cooperated fully with detectives, expressing genuine grief and confusion. He provided a detailed account of his evening, explaining that he had stayed home to bake a cake for her upcoming 22nd birthday. While investigators initially held him as a person of interest due to some minor relationship tensions reported by acquaintances, early genetic testing eventually ruled him out completely, forcing detectives to look elsewhere. A secondary shock wave hit the community approximately 10 days later, when a telephone call alerted the police to the discovery of a portion of Angela's remains in the canal, near a popular local shopping center located 2 miles south of the original crime scene. Forensic experts noted that the preservation of these remains was inconsistent with the length of time they had been in the water, leading to the chilling hypothesis that the perpetrator had stored them in a temperature-controlled environment before discarding them in a highly visible area. Criminologists suggested this act was designed to maximize public fear and show off the perpetrator's evasion of law enforcement, adding a psychological layer of cruelty to the physical crime. Despite a massive investigation, a dedicated hotline, and countless patrols by officers searching for the unique purple mountain bike, the trail went cold. For 10 months, the city remained on high alert, with patrol officers carefully observing local parks, schoolyards, and apartment complexes, hoping to spot a suspicious individual or the missing bicycle. Then, in September of 1993, the fear escalated once again when a cyclist spotted the body of another young woman floating in the canal, directly across from where Angela's remains had been found months earlier. The second victim was identified as Melanie Bernis, a 17-year-old high school junior who was described by those who knew her as a bright, adventurous, and creative teenager. She had gone for an evening bicycle ride and did not return, prompting her mother to report her missing. The scene of her discovery shared chilling similarities with the first case, including a trail of physical evidence leading away from the path, signs of a sudden ambush, and the complete disappearance of her bicycle. In a bizarre twist, Melanie's remains were found clad in a child-sized turquoise bodysuit that did not belong to her, while her own clothing had been cut away and left at the scene. Investigators also noted symbolic markings left on her body, which they believed were intended to convey a dark message from the attacker. To understand why these tragic cases occurred, and why similar crimes can happen with some frequency, it is essential to analyze the criminological theories surrounding public spaces. Isolated recreational trails, particularly in the evening hours, present what criminologists call the routine activities theory scenario, which requires a motivated offender, a suitable target, and the absence of a capable guardian. These trails often lack adequate lighting, emergency call boxes, and surveillance cameras, making them ideal hunting grounds for predators who rely on the element of surprise. The victims were simply enjoying a healthy, outdoor activity, completely unaware that a highly motivated individual was using the cover of darkness and natural vegetation to ambush unsuspecting passersby. The psychological motives of the perpetrator in these cases were deeply rooted in a desire for total control, dominance, and the realization of extreme, violent fantasies. Forensic psychologists often observe that individuals who commit such acts suffer from severe personality disorders, exacerbated by a history of unresolved personal trauma. In this case, the perpetrator sought to project a sense of ultimate power over his victims, utilizing extreme physical force to compensate for his own deep-seated feelings of inadequacy and failure in his personal life. The symbolic acts, such as the preservation of remains, the use of unusual clothing, and the markings left on the victims, served as a way for the offender to prolong his feelings of gratification and relive the crimes long after they were committed. From an analytical standpoint, the perpetrator displayed a strange mix of sophistication and sheer recklessness. On one hand, he was highly sophisticated in his ability to select isolated locations, execute swift attacks without leaving immediate eyewitnesses, and avoid leaving identifying physical evidence that could be easily traced in the early 1990s. He also showed a calculated understanding of the limitations of police patrols along the expansive canal system. On the other hand, his psychological need to display his actions through the placing of remains near a shopping center and the use of a highly specific bodysuit created critical loopholes. These symbolic acts ultimately generated the very clues that would lead to his downfall decades later, proving that even the most meticulous planning cannot fully account for the irrational desires of a criminal mind. In 1999, as forensic technology advanced, scientists were able to extract detailed genetic profiles from the evidence preserved from both crime scenes. For the first time, investigators definitively confirmed that the same individual was responsible for the loss of both Angela and Melanie. This scientific link was a major milestone, but because the perpetrator's genetic profile was not present in the national database, the identity of the killer remained a mystery. As the years turned into decades, the community's immediate panic subsided, and many believed the perpetrator had either passed away, been incarcerated for an unrelated offense, or moved away from the state of Arizona. The investigation received a vital resurgence in 2011 when a cold case unit led by Sergeant Troy Hillman reopened the files. Confronted with a list of nearly 1,000 potential suspects and persons of interest, compiled over 19 years, the team began the grueling process of systematically narrowing down the leads. The breakthrough finally arrived in late 2014 through the pioneering application of forensic genetic genealogy. By utilizing Y chromosome genetic testing, which traces the paternal lineage of a family, a genealogist was able to match the crime scene evidence to a specific family surname, Miller. Upon reviewing the list of individuals with the surname Miller in the Phoenix area, investigators focused their attention on a 42-year-old man named Bryan Patrick Miller. A deep archive search revealed a highly disturbing criminal history. In 1989, as a teenager, he had been apprehended for a violent attack in which he stabbed a woman in the back near a local mall, later claiming she resembled his abusive mother. Because he was a juvenile at the time, he was released on his 18th birthday in 1990. On the day of his release, his mother had provided authorities with a highly graphic document she found in his room, detailing a step-by-step plan to commit acts of extreme violence against women. Furthermore, investigators discovered that after his release, he had moved to Washington State, where he was involved in another violent altercation with a woman, though he evaded conviction by claiming self-defense. Because he had not been convicted of a felony in that state, his genetic profile was never entered into any national database, allowing him to remain invisible to law enforcement systems. Most incredibly, detectives uncovered an anonymous telephone tip from 1994 that had explicitly mentioned Bryan Patrick Miller in connection with a child bodysuit, matching the one found on Melanie. Amidst the thousands of tips received during the initial investigation, this crucial piece of information had unfortunately been filed away and overlooked, illustrating the immense difficulty of managing massive quantities of physical data before the advent of modern computerized tracking systems. By 2011, Miller had returned to Phoenix and was living a remarkably public life, heavily involved in the local steampunk and costume roleplay community. He had created an alter ego for himself, known as the Zombie Hunter, dressing in elaborate protective gear, goggles, and carrying replica weaponry. He had even purchased an old police cruiser, painting it with his Character S logo, and frequently attended public parades and festivals, taking photographs alongside real law enforcement officers. This public display of a law-enforcing persona was a supreme irony, revealing a man who sought to hide his history of horrific violence by publicly adopting the caricature of a hero. He was literally hiding in plain sight, interacting with the very community he had terrorized decades earlier. To apprehend him without alerting him to their suspicions, detectives devised a clever plan that appealed directly to his affinity for law enforcement. An undercover detective contacted Miller, pretending to represent a local security firm, and offered him a job monitoring a commercial facility. Flattered by the offer, Miller agreed to meet the detective at a local restaurant, bringing his teenage daughter along. During the meeting, the undercover officers carefully monitored his movements and successfully collected a drinking glass he had used. Within 2 weeks, forensic analysts confirmed that the genetic material from the glass matched the evidence found at both crime scenes from the early 1990s. On January 13, 2015, Bryan Patrick Miller was arrested and charged with the murders of Angela Brasso and Melanie Burness. During his interrogation, he denied any knowledge of the crimes or the canal trails, despite the overwhelming scientific evidence against him. His trial began in 2022, where his defense attorneys argued that he suffered from a severe dissociative identity disorder stemming from extreme childhood abuse, suggesting he was not responsible for his actions. The prosecution, supported by expert medical testimony, successfully argued that childhood trauma, while tragic, does not excuse deliberate acts of calculated violence. On April 11, 2023, the court found him guilty on all counts, and he was subsequently sentenced to the maximum penalty allowed by law. This long journey to justice offers profound educational lessons for communities and law enforcement agencies worldwide. For citizens, it emphasizes the absolute importance of personal safety and situational awareness when utilizing public trails. Whenever possible, individuals should avoid traveling alone on isolated paths, especially during the early morning or late evening hours. Carrying communication devices, staying on well-lit, highly populated routes, and informing family members of one's planned path and expected return time are simple yet highly effective measures to prevent tragedy. Furthermore, community members should never hesitate to report unusual or suspicious behavior to the authorities, as even the smallest observation can prevent a potential crime. For law enforcement, this case serves as an invaluable lesson in the power of technological adaptation and meticulous record-keeping. The delay in identifying the perpetrator was largely due to the limitations of early database systems and the sheer volume of paper tips that could not be easily cross-referenced. Today, the integration of advanced digital tip management systems allows investigators to search, categorize, and prioritize leads instantly, ensuring that critical information is never lost in the archives. Additionally, the success of forensic genetic genealogy demonstrates that cold cases are never truly hopeless, and police departments must continue to invest in and utilize emerging scientific methods to solve unresolved crimes and bring closure to grieving families. Ultimately, this case is a testament to the enduring power of justice and the resilience of a community. While the lives of Angela Brasso and Melanie Burness were tragically cut short, their memory remains honored through the relentless efforts of the detectives, scientists, and prosecutors who refused to give up on them. The story stands as a solemn warning to those who believe they can escape the consequences of their actions, illustrating that no matter how long a perpetrator hides behind a mask or a public persona, the truth will eventually come to light, ensuring that goodness and justice will always prevail over darkness. The tranquil canal paths of Phoenix, Arizona, have long served as a scenic retreat for residents seeking outdoor recreation, physical fitness, and a connection with nature. In the early 90s, these pathways were bustling with joggers, cyclists, and families enjoying the warm desert evenings. However, the very design that made these trails so appealing, their seclusion from major roadways, the dense vegetation lining the embankments, and the relative lack of public surveillance, also created a vulnerability that a determined predator could exploit. The tragic events that unfolded along these waterways highlight a profound sociological and psychological challenge, demonstrating how shared public spaces can be transformed from areas of community bonding into landscapes of fear When individuals with deep-seated psychological trauma and malicious intent choose to operate within them. To understand why itche hat cases occur with alarming frequency in secluded recreational areas, one must examine the intersection of urban design, community trust, and the specific pathology of opportunity-based offenders. Secluded pathways often provide what criminologists refer to as a low-risk environment for perpetrators. In the early 90s, municipal infrastructure did not feature the widespread installation of closed-circuit television cameras, and mobile communication technology was in its absolute infancy. A person traveling on a bicycle or on foot could easily vanish into the surrounding neighborhoods or canal embankments without leaving a trace or being noticed by witnesses. This ease of escape, combined with the predictable patterns of recreational trail users, creates an environment where a predator can bide their time, observing potential targets from a position of safety before executing a swift, unexpected assault. The psychological motive driving these crimes is rarely simple. It is often rooted in a pathological desire for total control, dominance, and the projection of internal rage onto completely innocent strangers. For an individual who harbors deep resentment, particularly stemming from unresolved childhood conflicts or a sense of personal inadequacy, the act of targeting a vulnerable person in a secluded space provides a distorted sense of absolute power that they lack in their everyday life. The narrative of this investigation begins with the life of Angela Brasso, a bright, energetic, and family-oriented 22-year-old who had recently completed her university education in the state of Pennsylvania. Eager to build a promising future, she relocated to the city of Phoenix alongside her companion, Joe, with whom she had maintained a dedicated relationship throughout her college years. Having recently secured a promising position in the field of information technology, she had just completed extensive professional training in the city of Los Angeles and was enthusiastic about establishing deep roots in her new desert home. On the evening of November 8th in the year 1992, a cool and crisp Sunday following the autumn celebrations, Angela set out for a routine bicycle ride along the Arizona Canal Trail. She assured her companion that she would return shortly, as they had planned to celebrate her upcoming birthday and watch a favorite television program together at 8 o'clock in the evening. When the hour passed and Angela did not return, her companion grew increasingly anxious. Knowing her reliable nature, he recognized that her absence was highly unusual and immediately began searching the local area. By 9 o'clock in the evening, with no sign of her return, he contacted the Phoenix Police Department to report her missing and also reached out to a female acquaintance to assist in the search. Responding officers arrived at the scene and initiated a search along the dark canal trail. Near the embankment, they discovered unmistakable signs of a physical struggle, including a significant amount of blood on the pathway and a visible trail leading toward a nearby berm. Following this path for approximately 100 feet, officers made a tragic and deeply disturbing discovery. They located the body of a young female who had been subjected to a sudden, overwhelming physical assault. The victim had been left without life, and in a deliberate effort to dehumanize her and hinder identification, the perpetrator had removed her head. The initial discovery sent shockwaves through the local community and placed the entire homicide unit on high alert. The physical evidence indicated a swift, blitz-style attack from behind, suggesting that the victim had been startled and immediately rendered unable to defend herself. The perpetrator had also removed her clothing and taken her highly distinctive mountain bicycle, a purple diamondback model, Vakep, ite hot, brilliant fluorescent shades that stood out significantly. The sheer brutality of the act led investigators to focus their initial attention on those closest to the victim, a standard and logical starting point in any major investigation. Joe was thoroughly interviewed by detectives, and while the presence of the female acquaintance he had invited to assist in the search raised initial questions, he cooperated fully and sincerely. Ultimately, early forms of deoxyribonucleic acid testing, which was then in its developmental stages, were utilized to compare his genetic profile with evidence recovered from the scene. The scientific results completely ruled him out as a suspect, leaving investigators to search for a highly elusive stranger. The fear gripping the city intensified approximately 10 days later, when a member of the public discovered Angela's head in the canal, approximately 2 miles south of the original crime scene, near a prominent shopping center known as the Metro Center Mall. The medical examiner noted a highly unusual detail. The state of preservation of the remains was inconsistent with the length of time they had been in the water, suggesting that the perpetrator may have utilized artificial cooling, such as a domestic freezer, to preserve the remains before deliberately placing them in a highly visible area. This calculated action suggested a desire for public shock and a perverse sense of accomplishment, indicating that the killer was not merely hiding, but actively seeking to terrorize the community. The popular canal paths quickly became entirely deserted, transformed into a virtual ghost town as residents avoided the area. Despite extensive efforts, patrol officers searching local neighborhoods and a dedicated public tip line, the investigation yielded no immediate breakthroughs. The passage of time did not bring safety, but rather a renewal of the tragedy. Approximately 10 months later, in September of the year 1993, the community was shattered once again when the body of another young cyclist was found floating in the canal, directly across from the location where the first victim's head had been recovered. The victim was identified as 17-year-old Melanie Burness, a bright, spontaneous, and adventurous high school student who had gone for a bicycle ride the previous evening and failed to return. An examination of the scene revealed striking similarities to the first case, including a significant struggle along the path, a trail leading into nearby vegetation, and a fatal physical assault. While Melanie had not been decapitated, the perpetrator had left a highly specific and unusual clue. She had been dressed in a child-sized turquoise bodysuit that did not belong to her and was far too small for her frame. Investigators analyzed this detail as a potential psychological calling card, a token representing a specific fantasy, or a deliberate attempt to confuse the investigation. The clothing she had actually been wearing was found torn and discarded nearby. Biological evidence was carefully collected from the scene, but at the time, the technology was not sufficiently advanced to establish a definitive link or locate a match in the national databases. The media labeled the unknown offender as the canal killer, and despite the mobilization of significant police resources, the trail grew cold as the 90s transitioned into a new decade. The general consensus among many investigators was that the perpetrator had either passed away, been incarcerated in another jurisdiction, or moved far away from the state of Arizona. However, the commitment of the Phoenix Police Department to achieving justice did not waver. In the year 1999, advancements in scientific testing allowed experts to reevaluate the preserved deoxyribonucleic acid evidence from both cases. The results provided a monumental breakthrough, confirming that the genetic profiles obtained from both Angela S. and Melanie S. crime scenes matched perfectly. This scientific certainty proved that a single individual was responsible for both crimes, uniting the two separate investigations into a singular pursuit of one highly dangerous predator. In the year 2011, the investigation received renewed focus when Detective Troy Hillman assumed leadership of the Cold Case Homicide Unit. Following a public records request from a local media outlet, Detective Hillman reopened the massive files, which contained a list of potential suspects and persons of interest numbering between 800 and 1,000 names. Recognizing the profound obligation to the families of the victims, he assembled a dedicated team to systematically review every lead. Over the course of the next 3.5 years, the team successfully ruled out more than 25 primary suspects through careful investigation and deoxyribonucleic acid comparison. Yet the identity of the true offender remained elusive. The critical turning point in the case occurred in the year 2014, when a forensic genealogist suggested a novel approach. By utilizing Y chromosome deoxyribonucleic acid testing, which tracks the paternal lineage through the male line, investigators could compare the perpetrator's genetic markers with public genealogical databases. If a relative had submitted their data to a commercial registry, the system could identify the family line. This cutting-edge technique yielded a definitive family name, Miller. Upon searching the local records for individuals matching this surname who resided in the Phoenix area during the early 90s, investigators focused on a man named Bryan Patrick Miller. A review of Miller's background immediately revealed a history of violence that aligned with the profile of the Canal Killer. In the year 1989, as a 17-year-old juvenile, he had been apprehended for a physical assault near a local shopping mall, where he had approached a woman from behind and stabbed her, later claiming she resembled his mother, with whom he had an abusive relationship. Most alarmingly, on the day he was scheduled to be released from juvenile detention, his mother had delivered a letter to authorities that she had discovered in his bedroom. This document, referred to as the plan, outlined a highly detailed, disturbing, and premeditated sequence of violent acts he wished to commit against a female target, including severe physical assault and loss of life. Furthermore, investigators discovered that after his release in the year 1990, Miller had relocated to the state of Washington, where he married and had a daughter. During his time there, he was involved in another violent incident where he stabbed a female acquaintance. Although he was ultimately acquitted in a court of law under a claim of self-defense, this acquittal meant that his genetic profile was never entered into the national law enforcement databases, explaining why he had remained invisible to the combined DNA index system for so many years. Following his divorce in the year 2006, he returned to the city of Phoenix. An investigation into his current activities revealed a striking and deeply ironic contrast between his private history and his public persona. Miller had become a prominent participant in the local steampunk and cosplay communities, adopting an elaborate public character known as the Zombie Hunter. He customized an older police vehicle with specialized decals, dressed in a long trench coat, goggles, and simulated armor, and carried mock weaponry to public festivals, parades, and community gatherings. He frequently posed for photographs with actual law enforcement officers, presenting himself as a colorful guardian of order and safety. This public performance was, in reality, a pathetic attempt to project power and hide his true nature in plain sight, demonstrating a sophisticated form of psychological camouflage. To secure a definitive deoxyribonucleic acid sample without alerting the suspect, investigators devised a creative and professional operation in the year 2015. A detective approached Miller at his place of work, pretending to seek his assistance as an informal security watchman for a neighboring business due to his known interest in law enforcement. Flattered by the attention, Miller agreed to meet the investigator at a local restaurant. Although he arrived with his teenage daughter, creating a brief complication for the surveillance team, officers successfully recovered a beverage cup he had used during the meeting. The sample was rushed to the laboratory, and within 2 weeks, the geneticists confirmed a perfect match to the biological evidence recovered from both crime scenes more than 2 decades earlier. On January 13th in the year 2015, Bryan Patrick Miller was arrested and taken into custody. During his interrogation, he claimed to have avoided the canal trails due to fear and expressed disbelief when informed of the scientific evidence linking him to the victims. Investigators also interviewed his ex-wife, who provided crucial testimony regarding his escalating interest in violent behavior, which had ultimately led to the end of their marriage. When the trial commenced in the year 2022, the defense did not contest that he had committed the acts, but argued that he was not psychologically responsible due to severe childhood trauma and abuse. However, the prosecution successfully demonstrated that his actions were highly planned, deliberate, and entirely within his control. On April 11th in the year 2003, the court returned a verdict of guilty on all counts, including murder, kidnapping, and physical assault, and the judge subsequently sentenced him to the maximum penalty of death, bringing a long-awaited resolution to a journey that began over 30 years prior. Reflecting on these cases offers vital lessons for personal safety and community vigilance. Public pathways, while designed for community enjoyment, require users to maintain active situational awareness. Individuals should attempt to utilize these trails during daylight hours and travel with a companion whenever possible. The integration of modern technology, such as sharing real-time GPS location details, vakepai, hot, trusted family members, and utilizing personal safety applications, can provide an essential layer of security. Furthermore, municipal planners can significantly reduce the risk of such crimes by installing consistent lighting, emergency call boxes, and clear signage along recreational corridors, ensuring that these areas remain hostile to predatory behavior. For law enforcement, the resolution of these decades-old cases demonstrates the immense value of preserving physical evidence and embracing scientific innovation. The early adoption of genetic genealogy has revolutionized cold case investigations, allowing departments to bypass traditional database limitations and identify suspects through familial connections. To accelerate future investigations, agencies must prioritize the rapid sharing of juvenile records across state lines and establish centralized multidisciplinary units dedicated to reevaluating unsolved files. The ultimate triumph of justice, in the cases of Angela Brasso and Melanie Burness, stands as a testament to the dedication of the investigating officers, the resilience of their families, and the enduring power of truth over darkness. The pursuit of justice and the protection of public safety are among the most profound responsibilities of any civilized society. When tragic events occur, they leave a deep impact on communities, prompting serious reflection on human behavior, the nature of security, and the psychological factors that drive individuals to commit acts of violence. By examining these complex events with a scientific, analytical, and respectful approach, society can learn valuable lessons to prevent future occurrences, support victims, and assist law enforcement in their vital work. To understand why certain grave offenses occur and how the individuals responsible can evade detection for extended periods, it is necessary to analyze both the psychological motivations of the perpetrator and the physical environments in which the events take place. In many instances, the motives behind severe personal violence are rooted in deep psychological disturbances, often originating from unresolved trauma, a history of developmental neglect, or severe domestic instability. When an individual experiences a highly chaotic and abusive childhood, their emotional growth can become severely distorted. They may develop a profound desire for control and dominance to compensate for the helplessness they felt during their formative years. Over time, these internal struggles can manifest as hostile projections toward others, where the individual seeks to exert power over vulnerable targets in order to satisfy a distorted inner narrative. The choice of location for such actions is rarely accidental. Recreational areas such as canal paths, public parks, and walking trails are designed to be peaceful spaces where community members can enjoy the outdoors, exercise, and find tranquility. However, these settings also possess specific physical characteristics that can unfortunately be exploited by those with malicious intent. During the late afternoon, evening, or early morning hours, these paths can become isolated. The presence of dense vegetation, a lack of artificial lighting, and the absence of immediate bystanders create areas of low visibility. In the late 20th century, the safety of these public spaces was further challenged by the limitations of technology. There were no widespread mobile communication devices, personal safety applications, or surveillance cameras monitoring the trails. This combination of public accessibility and physical isolation meant that individuals exercising alone could find themselves in vulnerable positions without any immediate means of calling for assistance. This environmental vulnerability, paired with an opportunist seeking a sense of control, explains why such cases can occur in areas that are otherwise considered safe and friendly. In the effort to resolve these challenging cases, law enforcement professionals must rely on a combination of physical evidence, community cooperation, and modern scientific techniques. Historically, one of the most significant challenges in tracking an unknown offender was the lack of direct leads or witnesses. In the early stages of an investigation, police officers must gather every possible piece of information, no matter how small it may seem. In the cases under review, the initial clues included distinct physical items, such as a highly unique mountain bike, veikepaite, hat vibrant purple coloration, which became a focal point for patrol officers searching the surrounding neighborhoods. Additionally, the careful preservation of biological evidence from the crime scenes proved to be the most critical decision made by the initial responding officers. Although the technology available in the early 1990s was not advanced enough to identify the individual immediately, the preservation of this genetic material ensured that it would remain viable for future analysis. As the years progressed, the evolution of forensic science transformed the landscape of criminal investigations. The development of advanced testing for deoxyribonucleic acid allowed scientists to create highly specific genetic profiles from the preserved evidence. A major breakthrough occurred when researchers successfully linked the genetic material from two separate cases, confirming that a single individual was responsible for both events. This scientific confirmation changed the direction of the investigation, demonstrating that the passage of time does not diminish the value of physical evidence. Despite this genetic link, the identity of the individual remained unknown because his profile was not present in the existing national databases. To overcome this obstacle, investigators turned to an innovative and sophisticated methodology known as genetic genealogy. This technique involves analyzing paternal genetic markers that are passed down through the male line of a family. By comparing these markers with publicly available genealogical databases, researchers can identify potential family names and construct ancestral trees. In this specific investigation, the application of genetic genealogy successfully pointed to the surname of Miller, narrowing a list of nearly 1,000 potential names down to a small, manageable group of individuals. Alongside this scientific breakthrough, the resolution of the case was aided by the meticulous review of historical records. Amidst the thousands of tips and pieces of information collected over decades, investigators uncovered an anonymous communication from the mid-1990s. This message had pointed directly to a specific individual and described items in his possession that matched key details of the case. In the rush of the initial investigation, when police forces were overwhelmed with hundreds of leads, this crucial tip had been filed away. The rediscovery of this document, combined with the genetic genealogy results, pointed directly to a single suspect. The behavior of the suspect highlights a significant psychological phenomenon, often referred to as hiding in plain sight. Rather than withdrawing from society or living in isolation, the individual actively participated in vibrant public communities. He became involved in the popular subcultures of steampunk and cosplay, where individuals dress in elaborate, historical, or fantastical costumes. He created a highly public persona known as the zombie hunter, complete with a customized vehicle designed to look like a tactical security transport, and he frequently posed for photographs with actual law enforcement officers at most community festivals and parades. This outward display of heroism and civic engagement served as a powerful psychological defense mechanism. By projecting an image of a protector who fights imaginary monsters, the individual attempted to distance himself from his own dark actions and present a character that was beyond suspicion. This elaborate public role-play allowed him to satisfy his desire for attention and social validation whilst maintaining a secret life. However, this sophisticated deception contained a fundamental loophole. The suspect failed to realize that his public activities made him highly visible to the community, and his physical presence in the local area allowed investigators to conduct targeted surveillance once his name was identified through genetic genealogy. The ultimate breakthrough in the case came through a carefully planned, non-confrontational law enforcement operation designed to obtain a fresh sample of the suspect's genetic material. An investigator approached the suspect under the guise of offering him a security role, appealing directly to his fascination with law enforcement. During a meeting at a local restaurant, the suspect used a drinking glass, which was subsequently recovered by the surveillance team. The laboratory analysis of this glass confirmed a perfect match with the deoxyribonucleic acid preserved from the crime scenes, leading to his arrest and eventual conviction in the year 2023. Reflecting on these events provides several profound lessons that can help individuals and communities prevent similar tragedies. The most important lesson is the necessity of maintaining personal safety and situational awareness when enjoying public spaces. While physical recreation is vital for health and well-being, it is crucial to recognize that isolation can present risks. Individuals are encouraged to practice the buddy system, exercising with a partner or small groups whenever possible. If one must exercise alone, it is wise to share their planned route and expected return time with a trusted friend or family member, and to use modern mobile applications that allow real-time location sharing. Additionally, maintaining sensory awareness is critical. Exercising ve kep, itahat, both headphones in, can prevent a person from hearing approaching footsteps, bicycles, or other sounds that might indicate a change in their surroundings. Keeping one ear free or using bone conduction headphones can significantly enhance situational awareness. It is also advisable to remain on well-traveled, designated paths and to avoid areas with dense foliage or limited lighting during the hours of dawn, dusk, and darkness. For communities, the prevention of etu-jhat cases requires a commitment to improving public infrastructure. Local governments can enhance the safety of recreational trails by installing active, energy-efficient lighting, clear signage, and visible emergency calling stations that connect directly to local dispatchers. The placement of security cameras at key entry and exit points along popular trails can act as a powerful deterrent to illegal activity and provide invaluable information to authorities if an incident does occur. Furthermore, these cases offer important insights into how law enforcement agencies can improve their investigative efficiency and resolve complex cases more rapidly. A key area for improvement is the implementation of advanced data management and artificial intelligence systems to organize and analyze public tips. In large-scale investigations, police departments are often flooded with thousands of phone calls and messages. Without sophisticated sorting tools, highly relevant clues can easily become lost among less urgent information. By using modern database systems that can automatically cross-reference names, addresses, physical descriptions, and specific details, investigators can quickly identify high-priority leads and ensure that no critical tip is overlooked. Another vital experience is the early integration of forensic genealogy in cold case investigations. Rather than waiting decades for traditional database matches, the systematic application of genetic genealogy can provide immediate directions for investigators, helping them narrow down large lists of potential suspects in a fraction of the time. This requires ongoing investment in scientific training for detectives and the establishment of dedicated cold case units that can focus exclusively on unresolved files without the distraction of active daily cases. The tragic and complex story began on a crisp evening in early November in the year 1992 in the city of Phoenix, within the state of Arizona. The desert air was cool and refreshing, making it an ideal time for outdoor activities. Angela Brasso, a 22-year-old college graduate who had recently relocated to the area from the state of Pennsylvania, decided to go for a brief bicycle ride along the Arizona Canal Trail. She was a young woman of great promise, known for her warm, friendly personality, her academic excellence, and her excitement for the future she was building with her boyfriend, Joe. Angela told Joe that she would return shortly, as they were planning to celebrate her upcoming birthday. However, as the evening progressed and more than an hour passed, Joe became increasingly concerned. They had a weekly tradition of watching a popular television program together every Sunday evening at 8 o'clock, and her failure to return by this time was highly unusual. Sensing that something was wrong, Joe contacted the Phoenix Police Department to report her missing. Fearing that she might have suffered an injury or a mechanical failure on her bicycle. In response to the call, patrol officers were dispatched to the vicinity of the Arizona Canal Trail near her apartment complex. As they walked along the path, they discovered a small amount of blood on the trail, which led to a deeper path heading toward a nearby tree line. Following this trail, officers made the tragic discovery of a female body. The scene was highly disturbing, as the victim had been subjected to severe physical violence, and her head was missing. The initial investigation began immediately, with homicide detectives arriving to secure the area and search for evidence. The level of violence was unprecedented for the community, causing widespread concern among residents who frequently used the canal trail for jogging, walking, and bicycling. The physical examination of the scene revealed that the victim had been attacked from behind in a swift, unexpected manner that left her unable to defend herself. Her clothing had been torn, and there were clear indications of a personal assault. A highly distinctive mountain bike, brilliant purple in color, was missing from the scene, suggesting that the perpetrator had taken it or disposed of it elsewhere. Patrol officers throughout the city were instructed to watch for this unique bicycle, hoping it would lead them to a suspect. Meanwhile, investigators turned their attention to those closest to the victim, which is a standard and necessary procedure in any major investigation. Joe, the boyfriend, cooperated fully with the authorities, providing detailed statements and agreeing to provide a sample of his genetic material. While the community grappled with fear, the investigation received another significant development approximately 10 days after the initial discovery. A citizen reported finding a human head in the canal, approximately 2 miles south of the original location, near a major shopping center. Forensic experts confirmed that the remains belonged to Angela. A detailed examination of the remains led some investigators to hypothesize that the perpetrator might have temporarily stored them in a cold environment to preserve them before placing them in the water, a detail that added to the unusual and troubling nature of the crime. Despite a massive search, numerous public appeals, and the establishment of a dedicated tip line, the investigation did not yield any immediate suspects. The genetic profile extracted from the evidence was entered into the national database, but because the perpetrator had no prior felony convictions that required the collection of his genetic data, there was no match. The canal path, once a bustling hub of community activity, became quiet as residents avoided the area, fearing that a dangerous individual was operating in their midst. The passage of time did not bring answers, and 10 months later, in September of the year 1993, a second tragedy occurred. A cyclist traveling along the same canal trail discovered the body of a young female floating in the water, directly across from the location where Angela's remains had been recovered 10 months earlier. The victim was identified as Melanie Burness, a 17-year-old high school student who had gone missing the previous evening after taking her bicycle out for a ride. Melanie was described by her family and friends as a bright, spontaneous, and adventurous young woman who worked at a local ice cream shop and had a deep love for the outdoors. Her sudden disappearance had prompted an immediate search by her family, who were devastated by the news of her discovery. The physical evidence at the second scene shared striking similarities with the first case. Investigators found a trail of blood leading from the bike path into the nearby vegetation, where she had been assaulted before her body was placed in the canal. One of the most unusual details of the second scene was that the victim had been dressed in a child-sized bodysuit that did not belong to her and was far too small for her frame. The perpetrator had also left physical marks on her body, which investigators believed were intended to convey a specific, troubled message. Recognizing the clear parallels between the two cases, the local media began referring to the unknown offender as the canal killer, and a sense of profound anxiety settled over the entire Phoenix metropolitan area. The police department dedicated significant resources to solving the crimes, assigning a large team of detectives to interview residents, check local bicycle shops, and follow up on thousands of public tips. However, the technological limitations of the era continued to hinder their efforts. The genetic evidence from the second case was preserved, but science had not yet advanced to the point where the two profiles could be definitively matched or used to identify an unknown family line. As the 1990s drew to a close, the active leads began to dry up, and the cases gradually became cold, though they were never forgotten by the families of the victims or the detectives who had worked so hard to find answers. In the year 1999, advancements in the technology of deoxyribonucleic acid allowed forensic experts to re-examine the evidence from both cases. For the first time, scientists were able to definitively confirm that the genetic material recovered from Angela's case matched the genetic material from Melanie's case. This scientific confirmation was a major milestone, proving beyond any doubt that a single serial offender was responsible for both tragedies. However, because the perpetrator's genetic profile was still not present in the national database, his identity remained a mystery. Another decade passed without any significant breakthroughs. The 10-year and 15-year anniversaries of the cases were marked by media coverage and renewed appeals for information. But no viable suspects emerged. Many began to believe that the individual responsible had either passed away, been incarcerated in another jurisdiction for unrelated offenses, or moved far away from the state of Arizona. In the year 2008, a veteran detective became the sergeant of the Cold Case Homicide Unit, bringing a renewed energy and focus to the Department's unresolved files. In the year 2011, a local media station requested public records regarding the canal killer cases, prompting the Cold Case Unit to formally reopen the investigation. The sergeant and his team retrieved the extensive files from the basement of the police department, uncovering a list of nearly 1,000 names of potential suspects and persons of interest that had been compiled over the years. The team established a clear goal: to systematically narrow down this massive list using the latest scientific methods. Over the next 3.5 years, the detectives worked diligently, ruling out more than 25 major leads through targeted genetic testing and historical research. Despite their dedication, they were still unable to find a match, and the investigation seemed to reach another standstill. In late December of the year 2014, a forensic genealogist suggested applying a new methodology to the case. This approach utilized genetic markers passed down through the paternal line to connect unidentified genetic material, existing family trees. The genetic sequence from the canal killer was submitted for genealogical analysis, and within a short period, the researcher contacted the Cold Case Unit with an exciting discovery. The genetic database had produced a strong match with the surname of Miller. The sergeant immediately returned to the office during the holiday season to review the list of potential suspects sharing that surname. Among the names, one stood out with chilling clarity: Bryan Patrick Miller. When detectives cross-referenced this name with their historical files, they discovered a crucial, long-forgotten tip from the year 1994. An anonymous caller had stated that they believed Bryan was in possession of a child-sized bodysuit that matched the description of the item found on Melanie. A detailed investigation into Miller's background revealed a highly troubling history of violent behavior that fit the psychological profile of the offender. In the year 1989, while still a teenager, had been arrested for a sudden physical attack on a woman in the back, which he later claimed was driven by anger toward his mother, who had subjected him to severe physical and emotional abuse during his childhood. Because he was a juvenile at the time of the attack, he was placed in a youth detention facility. Upon his scheduled release on his 18th birthday, in the year 1990, his mother had presented authorities with a document she found in his bedroom, which outlined a detailed, violent plan targeting women. Despite these warnings, he was eventually released. In the mid-1990s, Miller moved to the state of Washington, where he married and had a daughter. During his time there, he was involved in another violent incident where he attacked a woman with a sharp object, though he was ultimately acquitted after claiming self-defense, which prevented his genetic profile from being entered into the national database. Following his divorce in the year 2006, Miller returned to the city of Phoenix with his teenage daughter. He began to participate actively in the local steampunk and cosplay communities, adopting the public persona of the zombie hunter. He spent significant time and resources customizing an old police vehicle with decals, security equipment, and theatrical props, driving it to community events, charity parades, and science fiction conventions. He wore an elaborate costume consisting of a long trench coat, protective goggles, a helmet, and replica gear, presenting himself as a friendly, protective figure who fought fictional threats. This striking contrast between his public persona and his hidden past was a revelation for the cold case team. They realized that the suspect was hiding in plain sight, using his elaborate character to blend into the community and interact with the public, including law enforcement officers, without raising suspicion. To secure his arrest, the detectives needed to obtain a fresh, undeniable sample of his genetic material without alerting him to their investigation. An investigator devised a clever plan, contacting Miller under the pretext of hiring him for a security position at a local distribution facility, appealing directly to his interest in law enforcement and public safety. Miller accepted the invitation to meet at a restaurant on the north side of the city. To the surprise of the surveillance team, he arrived with his teenage daughter, requiring the officers to observe them closely to ensure they collected the correct items. After Miller took a few sips from his drinking glass and departed, the surveillance team carefully recovered the glass and sent it to the forensic laboratory for urgent analysis. 2 weeks later, the laboratory supervisor contacted the cold case sergeant to confirm that the genetic profile from the glass was an exact match to the deoxyribonucleic acid recovered from both Angela and Melanie. On January 13th in the year 2015, detectives arrested Bryan Patrick Miller. During his interrogation, he denied any knowledge of the crimes, claiming he had always avoided the canal trails because they made him feel unsafe. However, investigators uncovered further evidence, including statements from his ex-wife describing his interest in unusual and violent activities, which supported the prosecution's case. The legal proceedings were extensive, culminating in a trial in the year 2022. The defense did not dispute that Miller had committed the acts, but argued that he was not criminally responsible due to the severe trauma and abuse he had suffered during his childhood, which they claimed had created a fractured psychological state. The prosecution countered with expert testimony, demonstrating that while his childhood was undoubtedly difficult, his actions were planned, deliberate, and driven by a desire for personal gratification rather than an inability to understand reality. On April 11th in the year 2023, the court found Bryan Patrick Miller guilty of multiple charges, including murder, kidnapping, and sexual assault in connection with the lives of Angela Brasso and Melanie Burness. The judge sentenced him to the ultimate penalty under the law, bringing a long and solemn chapter in the history of the city of Phoenix to a close. The resolution of these cases stands as a testament to the dedication of the law enforcement officers who refused to let the passage of time diminish their commitment to justice. It highlights the incredible power of modern science to uncover the truth and serves as a lasting reminder of the importance of community vigilance, parental care, and the continuous effort to protect the vulnerable in our society. The memories of Angela and Melanie continue to be honored by their families, who remember them not for the tragedy that took them, but for the light, joy, and hope they brought to everyone who knew them. The intersection of community safety and private malevolence is one of the most challenging areas of modern criminology. When citizens engage in everyday activities such as exercising, walking, or riding a bicycle, they operate under a shared social contract of mutual safety. This contract is particularly vital on public recreational paths, such as the canal systems that crisscross urban desert environments. These locations provide natural beauty and physical freedom, yet they also possess inherent vulnerabilities due to their geographic isolation, limited illumination, and lack of immediate assistance. The tragic events that unfolded along the Arizona Canal in the city of Phoenix during the early 1990s serve as a profound study in both the vulnerabilities of public spaces and the ultimate triumph of systematic scientific investigation over elusive offenders. By examining the structural factors that allow such tragedies to occur, analyzing the psychological motives of the perpetrator, and outlining the complex path to resolution, society can glean valuable lessons to prevent future occurrences and assist law enforcement in securing communities more rapidly. To understand why these tragedies occurred with such devastating frequency within a relatively short period, one must analyze the physical and environmental circumstances of the location. Public canal paths are designed to facilitate transit and recreation, offering long, uninterrupted stretches of paved ground that are highly appealing to runners and cyclists. However, these very characteristics also attract those with criminal intent. The paths are often bordered by dense vegetation, steep embankments, and concrete barriers, creating natural blind spots where an individual can remain hidden from the view of nearby residential areas or roadways. During the late hours of the day, as the sun begins to set, these paths quickly lose visibility. In the early 1990s, many urban recreational paths lacked the extensive surveillance systems, emergency call boxes, and consistent patrols that are more common today. This lack of infrastructure created a dangerous opportunity for a motivated offender to monitor the habits of solitary recreationalists, identify vulnerable targets, and carry out swift assaults without fear of immediate detection or witness intervention. The psychological motive behind these actions is deeply rooted in a desire for control, dominance, and the externalization of personal grievances through extreme acts of hostility. Criminological analysis suggests that individuals who engage in such targeted, opportunistic assaults often harbor deep-seated resentment that can stem from turbulent developmental years or highly dysfunctional domestic environments. Rather than addressing these internal conflicts through constructive means, they seek out individuals whom they perceive as vulnerable, projecting their anger and desire for power onto unsuspecting victims. The choice of solitary cyclists who are focused on their physical exertion and may not anticipate danger in a familiar community setting allows the offender to execute a sudden assault that minimizes the opportunity for defense. The repetitive nature of these acts, occurring approximately 10 months apart, indicates a pattern of behavior where the perpetrator derives a sense of accomplishment and gratification from the distress caused to the community, even going so far as to leave behind specific indicators to amplify the public impact of the crimes. The first tragic event occurred on the evening of November 8th in the year 1992, just a week after the season of autumn celebrations. Angela Brasso, a 22-year-old graduate who had recently relocated to Phoenix from the state of Pennsylvania, set out for a routine bicycle ride along the Arizona Canal. Angela was a highly dedicated professional working in the field of information technology, known by her friends, family, and colleagues as an exceptionally friendly, vibrant, and industrious individual. She and her companion, Joe, had recently established their home together in an apartment complex situated very close to the canal path, looking forward to building a promising future in the region. On that crisp November evening, Angela informed Joe that she would return shortly from her ride, a common practice that had never previously caused concern. However, as more than 1 hour passed without her return, Joe became increasingly anxious. Knowing that they had a firm commitment to watch a popular Sunday evening television program together at 8 o'clock, he realized that her absence was highly uncharacteristic and indicated that something was amiss. After attempting to locate her, and fearing she might have sustained an injury along the dark path, Joe contacted the local police department to report her missing. Responding officers began a systematic search of the canal banks near the apartment complex. Their search soon led to the discovery of troubling physical evidence along the path. Officers observed physical signs of a struggle, including a trail of fluids extending approximately 100 feet north of the main trail toward a group of trees and an elevated embankment. At the terminus of this trail, officers discovered the remains of a deceased individual. The physical state of the remains indicated that the victim had been subjected to an extremely hostile and highly disrespectful physical assault. The perpetrator had removed her clothing, leaving only her footwear, and had inflicted severe physical trauma to her body. Furthermore, the assailant had separated her remains in an apparent effort to delay identification and create a sense of profound distress within the local area. The severity of the assault immediately prompted a full-scale homicide investigation. Due to the proximity to the apartment complex and the physical description of the bicycle Angela had been riding, investigators strongly suspected they had located the missing young woman, a determination later confirmed through forensic comparison. The local community was instantly gripped by a state of intense apprehension. The Arizona Canal, which had previously been a bustling hub of daily exercise and community interaction, quickly transformed into a deserted area as residents feared a dangerous individual was operating in their midst. Homicide detectives meticulously processed the scene, gathering physical evidence, including garments that had been compromised during the assault. From these items, laboratory technicians were able to isolate a genetic profile belonging to an unknown male. However, in the year 1992, the National Genetic Database, known as the Computerized DNA Index System, was only in its absolute infancy, meaning that unless the perpetrator's genetic material was already registered due to a prior conviction, a direct match could not be achieved. In accordance with standard investigative protocols, detectives initially directed their attention toward those closest to the victim, specifically her companion, Jo. Investigations revealed that the couple had experienced minor disagreements regarding their future living arrangements, leading detectives to consider him a person of interest. Jo, however, demonstrated complete cooperation with the authorities, providing a detailed account of his activities on the night of the disappearance, which involved preparing a cake for Angela's upcoming 22nd birthday. He also explained that he had invited a female acquaintance to assist him in searching for Angela once he became concerned, a detail that initially raised analytical questions, but was ultimately found to be a sincere reaction to a frightening situation. The definitive resolution regarding his involvement came through scientific analysis, as his genetic sample was compared to the material recovered from the crime scene, completely excluding him as a source and allowing investigators to redirect their efforts toward identifying an unknown assailant. With no immediate suspects, investigators focused on finding Angela's highly distinctive bicycle, which was a professional-grade mountain bicycle of a bright fluorescent purple coloration that stood out significantly. Patrol officers throughout the city were instructed to monitor local neighborhoods, apartment parking areas, and educational facilities in hopes of locating the vehicle. Yet the search yielded no immediate results. The mystery deepened approximately 10 days after the initial discovery, when the department received a report of a physical remains found in the canal near a major retail center located approximately 2 miles south of the original crime scene. Forensic examination confirmed that this finding was indeed the missing portion of Angela's remains. Surprisingly, the scientific analysts noted that the state of preservation was inconsistent with having spent the entire 10-day period in the water, leading to the analytical hypothesis that the perpetrator had stored the remains in a refrigerated environment before placing them in the public waterway to maximize the psychological impact on the community. For 10 months, the investigation continued without a major breakthrough, despite the diligent efforts of the local police and the processing of numerous public tips. Then, in September of the year 1993, a second tragedy occurred. A cyclist traveling along the canal path discovered the body of a young female floating in the water, directly across from the location where the remaining portion of Angela's remains had been recovered the previous year. The victim was identified as 17-year-old Melanie Bernas, a high school junior known for her bright intelligence, spontaneous personality, and deep love for outdoor activities. Melanie had gone out for an evening ride on her bicycle, and when she did not return, her family began a desperate search. The recovery of her body revealed clear indicators of a violent encounter along the canal bank, including physical signs of a struggle, garments that had been compromised, and a trail leading into nearby vegetation where the assault had occurred. While Melanie S.'s body had not been subjected to the same level of separation as Angela S., there were distinct similarities that immediately caught the attention of seasoned detectives. The location of the assault, the choice of a solitary female cyclist, and the presence of specific physical alterations on her person strongly suggested the work of the same individual. Most peculiarly, Melanie was found wearing a small, highly compressed piece of child's clothing that did not belong to her and could not have fit her under normal circumstances. Investigators surmised that this item possessed some personal significance to the assailant, acting as a behavioral marker or a highly unusual artifact of the crime. Despite public appeals and the dissemination of descriptions regarding this unique garment, no immediate leads materialized, and the community's fear reached unprecedented heights, with the media coining a moniker for the elusive individual that reflected the geographic locus of the crimes. The scientific validation of the link between the two tragedies occurred in the year 1999, when advancements in forensic genetic technology allowed analysts to perform a highly detailed reevaluation of the preserved physical evidence. The analysis confirmed with absolute scientific certainty that the genetic material recovered from the garments of both Angela Brasso and Melanie Burness belonged to the exact same male individual. This development was a monumental step forward, as it proved that investigators were indeed searching for a single serial offender. However, because this genetic profile did not correspond to any registered offender within the regional or national databases, the identity of the individual remained completely unknown. As the years progressed into the first decade of the 21st century, the lack of new developments led to a general theory among some investigators that the perpetrator had either passed away, been incarcerated in another jurisdiction for unrelated matters, or permanently departed from the region.